They didn't know it yet, but 3,055 men were boarding their final voyage. What they also didn't know was that American commanders, sitting in war rooms 5,000 miles away, had already read their orders. The execute signal for Operation Tengo was intercepted by American codebreakers on March 26, 1945. Every plan, every coordinate, every date known. On April 6, 1945, at 1600, the battleship Yamato, the largest warship ever built, slipped away from Tokuyama with a light cruiser and 8 destroyers. They were headed toward Okinawa. The crew had been told directly, this was suicide. The midshipmen were sent ashore. Only the strong remained, and they knew. But what the men aboard Yamato didn't know was this. Their ship was already dead. The Americans were waiting. They had positioned 386 carrier aircraft at precisely the right coordinates. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution scheduled down to the minute. In the next 6 hours, Yamato would transit through the night. The largest battleship in history would rest on the bottom of the East China Sea. A mushroom cloud would rise 3.7 miles into the sky, visible 100 miles away on the Japanese mainland. This is the story of how 3,055 men died not in glorious battle, but in a mission everyone knew was impossible. This is the story of the end of an era. On March 29, 1945, Emperor Hirohito asked a single question during a briefing. What is the Navy doing? That question changed everything. The Japanese Navy was shattered, aircraft carriers gone. What remained were battleships without air cover, an anachronism in a war air power had won. The emperor's question wasn't about strategy. It was about honor. Japan needed to show the world it still had a navy. Admiral Suweimu Toyota, commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, made the decision. Send Yamato. Send what was left. Send it knowing it would fail. Send it because the emperor demanded an answer. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito received the order to command the mission. He refused. He was the operational commander, the man whose judgment could not be questioned, and he stated on record that the operation could not succeed. Vice Admiral Kusaka flew from Tokyo to Tokuyama on April 5th, personally to pressure Ito into compliance. Even the most senior admiral had to be coerced into this suicide mission. When the ship captains were finally briefed on April 5th, it provoked what historians describe as the closest thing to a mutiny in the Japanese Navy. Captain Taimichi Hara, commanding the light cruiser Yahagi, witnessed the meeting and described it as quite contentious. The captains unanimously objected. They saw it as sheer folly of attacking in daylight without air cover. They predicted they would never reach Okinawa. They were right, but the emperor wanted it. Disobedience was not an option. The captains fell in line. The admirals accepted their orders. The crew boarded, knowing they would die. This was not military strategy. This was national honor demanding blood. Yamato had to die because the emperor asked what the Navy was doing, and the only answer Japan's leadership could give was send the battleship to its death. The night of April 6th became a nightmare of anticipation. Yamato and her escorts transited the Bungo Strait. They moved slowly, deliberately, toward their destiny. American submarines tracked them in the darkness. Submarine Threadfin sighted the force at 1745 and issued a contact report in the clear, unencrypted. At 1944, another detailed position report, also unencrypted. The submarine names, the ship names, the force coordinates, all broadcast into the night where Japanese radio intelligence could intercept every word. The commanding officers aboard Yamato heard their own ship's names spoken aloud on the radio. They understood what was happening. They were being hunted, not by enemy fleets they could fight, but by forces coordinating against them in real time. The Americans knew exactly where they were. The Americans knew exactly where they were going. This was psychological warfare before the battle even began. By dawn on April 7th, American reconnaissance aircraft appeared in the sky. At 8:23, the first aircraft sighting report. The Americans had found them. The Japanese force was no longer a secret. It was a target. What followed would take 1 hour and 46 minutes. In those 106 minutes, Yamato's fate would be sealed not by overwhelming firepower or superior tactics, but by a single destruction that would occur within the first 4 minutes of attack. The battleship had survived 18 months of continuous combat. She had been present at Midway, at the Philippine Sea, at Leyte Gulf. Yamato had endured this far into a war that was already lost. She had been attacked countless times. She had been damaged. She had been repaired. She had always survived. But this morning would be different. On a bright April morning in 1945, under a clear sky, with American aircraft coordinated into multiple waves, Yamato would meet her end. Not against a worthy opponent, not in a battle of equals, but against mathematics, against overwhelming numbers, against an enemy coordinating from a distance, striking from above, hitting blind targets. The largest battleship ever built was about to learn what every ship would learn in the next 30 years. Air power was absolute. At 12:37 p.m., the first American bombers began their attack runs. Yamato's anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Her radar had detected the incoming aircraft at 63 nautical miles. The battleship should have been ready. Yamato carried 162 anti-aircraft guns. Her fire control radar was among the best in the world. Theoretically, she could rain thousands of shells per minute on any target. The mathematics of firepower suggested the battleship should hold its own. Then, at 12:41 p.m., everything changed. 2 bombs struck the deck. A third bomb, a single 2,000-pound armor-piercing projectile, penetrated the superstructure and destroyed the radar room. In that instant, Yamato's entire fire control system died. The battleship lost the ability to coordinate accurate anti-aircraft fire. The radar that could see targets 63 nautical miles away was gone. Thousands of guns remained functional. The ammunition was still loaded. The crews were still trained, but the central nervous system was severed. Gun crews reverted to visual targeting. They fired at fast-moving American aircraft they could barely see, let alone calculate accurate lead for. American pilots reported that Japanese anti-aircraft fire appeared wildly inaccurate because Yamato was fighting blind. In those first 4 minutes, from 12:37 to 12:41, the outcome was decided. The largest battleship ever built would not be destroyed by armor penetration or pure torpedo damage. It would be destroyed by the loss of its sensory system. A warship, however massive, however armored, however powerful, is only as effective as its ability to see and coordinate. Take away vision, and you have a blind giant. At 12:45 p.m., the first torpedo struck the port side. The battleship shuddered. Water flooded in. The ship began to list to port. The mathematics of flooding began. But by the time that first torpedo hit, the battle was already over. The Americans had maintained control of the tactical picture, while Yamato descended into blindness. The largest battleship ever built had become, in 4 minutes, a target that could not defend itself. Yamato began to list heavily to port. The compartments flooded. Damage control crews moved with professional precision. They understood the mathematics of sinking. They knew a 15-degree list could be managed. 18 degrees was approaching critical. Between 12:47 and 1300 p.m., 3 or 4 additional torpedoes struck the port side. The list increased. At 13:33 p.m., less than an hour into the battle, the damage control officer made a decision that would echo through history. They deliberately flooded the starboard engine rooms and boiler rooms. The logic? If they flooded the opposite side, the lists would cancel. The ship would level. Yamato might survive. But sealed compartments were not empty. Japanese sailors in the starboard engine rooms, young men, professional sailors, heard the flooding orders and understood what was happening. They were being deliberately drowned. Their own command was consciously sacrificing them to keep the ship afloat. Hundreds of men, sealed below decks, listening as water rose. The counterflooding failed. The lists did not cancel. Yamato continued to sink. The ship slowed to 10 knots. The desperate calculation yielded nothing but more death. This was the reality of naval combat in the modern age. Not glorious sacrifice, not heroic stands, but the mathematics of desperation. How many men must we kill to buy an hour? How many of our own sailors must we drown to maybe, just maybe, reach the target? The answer, Vice Admiral Ito soon realized, was that no number was sufficient. At 14:02 p.m., Ito issued the order to abandon ship. The mission was impossible. The ship was dying. There was no strategy left, no tactic, no calculation that could change the outcome. The largest battleship ever built had become a tomb, and the only remaining question was how many of the 3,332 men aboard would make it to the water before the ship went down. At 12:40 p.m., Yamato capsized completely. From the first bomb at 12:41 to complete capsizing, 1 hour and 39 minutes had passed. The ship died slowly enough that men could abandon her, quickly enough that many could not escape. The crew that made it to the water faced American aircraft that had circled back. They strafed the survivors. Oil fires burned across the ocean's surface. The water itself seemed to burn. Rescue destroyers approached, but they could save only a fraction of the men in the water. For most, the sea became the final enemy, colder than the heat of combat, more patient than bombs or bullets. Captain Tameichi Hara, commanding the destroyer Yahagi from 6 to 8 kilometers away, witnessed the final moments. He watched Yamato capsized. He watched the battleship disappear beneath the waves. He described what he saw with brutal simplicity. It was like throwing an egg against a rock. Hara was only one of 2 Japanese destroyer commanders to survive the entire war. He understood the historical moment. He was watching the final proof that battleships were obsolete. The age of naval dominance through massive guns and thick armor was ending. Air power had won. Coordination had defeated isolation. At 14:23 p.m., as Yamato's bow completed its descent, the forward magazine detonated. The forward main battery, thousands of 46-centimeter shells with thousands of pounds of high explosive in each one, all detonated simultaneously. The explosion created a mushroom cloud that rose 3.7 miles into the air. The shockwave radiated outward with such force that it knocked American aircraft out of the sky. More aircraft were brought down by Yamato's death explosion than had been shot down by Japanese anti-aircraft fire during the entire engagement. The ship's final defiant gesture was to explode. Men swimming in the water who had escaped the burning hulk just moments before were killed by the shockwave from their own ship's magazine. The wreckage of Yamato sank into the darkness, 290 kilometers southwest of Kyushu, 340 meters below the surface of the East China Sea. Vice Admiral Ito was not among the survivors. Neither was Captain Iruga. They went down with the ship, choosing honor over escape. 2 Japanese sailors survived Yamato's sinking and lived to tell what they had witnessed. Kazuhiro Fukumoto was trapped below decks when the flooding began. He fought through compartments rapidly filling with seawater. He watched men around him disappear beneath the surface. He heard the sounds of the ship dying, the groaning of metal, the roar of water, the mechanical screams of structural failure. He escaped into the chaos above as catastrophic explosions ripped through the ammunition magazines. What he witnessed was not a statistic. It was the singular horror of watching your ship disintegrate around you. Naoshi Ishida survived differently. He made it to the water and swam in burning fuel oil as American aircraft strafed survivors. Rescue ships arrived too late for most. He was among the few pulled aboard. Between them, Fukumoto and Ishida had experienced what 3,055 men did not survive to describe. They knew what it meant when a magazine detonated inside a 72,000-ton steel hull. They knew what it meant to be abandoned in the water. They knew the promises made to the crew, that Yamato was unsinkable, that battleship armor was invulnerable, that the Emperor's will would protect them, were lies told to men already marked for death. Of the 3,332 men who departed Tokuyama, only 276 survived. That is a 91.7% casualty rate. Only 1 in 12 survived. This casualty ratio exceeded most of the deadliest battles in naval history. When Fukumoto and Ishida returned to Japan and tried to explain what had happened, the authorities struggled to understand. How could the world's largest battleship be destroyed so quickly? How could all that armor, all that firepower, all that imperial determination result in such complete annihilation? They had no answers for the authorities. They only had memories. Fire, water, men dying in darkness below decks, the terrible cold of the ocean as rescuers approached too late. The image of their ship's bow disappearing into the darkness, the largest battleship ever built, sinking, gone, finished. The wreck of Yamato rests 290 kilometers southwest of Kyushu, under 340 meters of water in 2 main sections. The remains were explored decades later. The compartment layouts were documented. The damage patterns were analyzed. The tomb holds the bodies of 3,055 men. What Yamato's death proved was simple but transformative. Battleships, however massive, however armored, however powerful, could not defend themselves against coordinated air attack. The largest warship ever built, the product of Japan's technological achievement, the symbol of imperial naval power, was rendered obsolete by 386 aircraft working in coordination. For 2 centuries, battleships had been the measure of naval power. Kings and emperors had invested fortunes in their construction. Nations had organized their entire strategies around protecting and deploying battleships. The age had lasted exactly 39 years, from the dreadnought in 1906 to Yamato sinking in 1945. An entire era of naval history contained in 4 decades. The pilots who attacked Yamato never saw the battleship except through bomb sights. They attacked from above, from ranges where the battleship's guns could not retaliate. They coordinated in ways battleship-to-battleship combat had never been coordinated. They proved that naval warfare belonged not to big guns and heavy armor, but to coordination, reach, and air power. The American understanding was immediate. Admiral Spruance recognized what had just happened. The battleship, which had been the cornerstone of American naval planning for decades, was now definitively obsolete. The Navy would never again organize its operations around battleships. The future belonged to aircraft carriers. The future belonged to air power projected across hundreds of miles, striking enemies that could not see the attackers and could not retaliate. The 3,055 men who died aboard Yamato died at the intersection of 2 eras. They died in the specific moment when the old era was proven obsolete by the new. History needed a symbol of that transition. It found one in the largest battleship ever built, sinking in less than 2 hours under air attack from enemies it could not see. The mushroom cloud that rose 3.7 miles into the air on April 7, 1945, was not just an explosion. It was the closing of a chapter in military history lasting nearly half a century. It was the opening of a new chapter where air power would reign supreme. It was the visual punctuation mark at the end of the age of battleships. And it was the proof, written in fire and water and the bodies of 3,055 men, that the future of naval warfare belonged to those who could see farthest, coordinate fastest, and strike from the greatest distance. The battleship age had ended. The age of air power had begun.